Morning.
Morning, sir.
How's it going?
Good.
Did you get to play any games since the last time?
So many, man. You wouldn't believe it. It's been way better than usual. No, and I imagine it's the same for you.
Yeah, no, I haven't gotten to touch a single game.
Man, all
What have
that
I done
time we
with my
had.
week, huh? Um, I'm curious. We at one point decided to work on an indie game together.
And you're
And
curious.
and for me that led in one direction, and for you that led in a different direction. And I guess I'm kind of curious how what were your ambitions, and how'd you get into the game industry or get out of the game industry or and whatnot?
Yeah, so I know we'd been looking to talk about this. I was thinking when we did talk about it, it might be a topic that you run away with, since you've made it, man.
Yeah, I'm
But
living the
for
dream.
me, yeah, you're living the dream. For me, obviously, it's a little bit more complex a story, maybe. But
Yeah, I was just kind of curious because particularly with the last talk that we did last podcast, um, we were kind of mentioning the old video game manuals and whatnot, and I was curious how much of an influence that had in wanting to get you into video games. And
Well, if I do go way back, that's very interesting because I will say probably very much. I last time I was in my parents' house actually visiting, I was just digging through some of my old stuff, and I found a binder which I very much remember. It's like this thick, I don't even know, like 6-inch binder. I don't know what it was meant to be for, like work reference materials or something. But anyway, I used to make paper games, and
right,
if you remember last episode, I kind of mentioned like I'd make like the manual for the game or something, but not
yeah,
like there's no game to go with it, but I'd make those. And the binder is just chock full of that. And it's like those
nice.
things, as well as I also used to like make card games up. I remember, do you remember
Like,
Disney Adventures?
no,
Okay, it was this. It's not important. It was just like Disney put it out, but it was just like a magazine for teens, man. Ooh, but they had a special on Magic the Gathering when it had
right,
just come out,
yeah,
and I read about it and thought it must be the best game ever. Like I never actually played it or had any idea how to play it or whatever, but it was like about this new game, Magic the Gathering, and it had pictures of the cards, and like I could see the card and I could see all the symbols on it. So
yeah.
I don't know if you've played the card game, but like
Yeah,
it would,
I actually
yeah,
have my older brother gave me a couple decks for
cool.
Christmas one year, and I played it once with him and then never again.
Yeah, it's I think as like from a design point of view, I think it's a really cool concept. I'm not into it, like I'm not
Yeah,
collecting it or anything, but um it's like I could see like the symbols, like it takes this much mana to cast this spell and this much and this much. So I just decided, since that was so awesome, I'd just make the game.
yeah,
So I like took a normal like 52 card, deck of cards, and I made like I said like, okay, the hearts are creatures, and the diamonds are spells, and the clubs are weapons, and like kind of made that out, like made my own, and imagined they looked like as cool as Magic cards. I just made my own rules. I did
yeah,
that a lot. I made these kind of like, I made like a weird boxing game. It was a card game, and like when you knock the guy down, you'd have to like flip cards, and if you flip a face card, he gets up. Otherwise, it's like 1, 2, 3, and just like you'd count the cards, and if you get 10 non-face cards, they didn't get up, which is not very likely. But anyway, I used to make that kind of weird game all the time, and I also made these paper games. I guess it was like I was always fascinated by maps. Like if you're playing a game, you're playing Metroid or something, and you draw the map out as you play. Like once you've
yeah,
beaten the game, I'd always keep the maps. So
yeah.
when
I remember particularly Final Fantasy Tactics.
mm,
There's like this hidden dungeon towards the end of the game, and it's
yeah,
all like pitch black, and I drew maps of every level in that dungeon and where you could find the items.
right. Cool. Well, I used to like. It's easy to just scribble out a map or get graph paper and say, okay, I went
Yeah,
this way, I went that way. But I'd intentionally draw the map as if I was like, I don't know, making this map for a magazine or something. Like I wanted to keep it when I was
right.
done, and that wasn't always possible because, of course, like you'd go way down this tunnel and you travel right for some however long, and when you actually draw, you don't know how long it is, and then when you like if the path circles around on itself, your map doesn't look like it should because it circles around in the wrong place. So that would always suck, but I'd try my best anyway. So when making these paper games, I'd actually kind of like make game maps and then make up weird rules. Like you'd have to like take your pen tip and draw around without accidentally bumping into anything, and if you could do that, you could beat the game. Just weird stuff like that. It was like the extent of what I could do without actually sitting in front of a computer and programming anything, I guess. And all of that came from, again, game manuals and playing games and just being so into the idea of doing it. And I don't know, it's like growing up, I don't know if it was, not to lay blame or anything, but kind of parental influence, or like just this idea that like, well, I'm so good at math, that's my thing, I have to do a mathy thing. I never really went the art path, and I never really went even like the game path. Like I kind of went the computer path.
I was, as you were telling that story, I was kind of thinking about how that's interesting, because like right from the very beginning, it sounds like you and I kind of deviated in our approach.
Well, when I was a kid, I used to draw constantly, and I used to love like more of a design. Like the technical part didn't interest me at all, and yet at school it was like, I don't know, I was kind of the math guy or whatever. So I think probably like talking to counselors and talking to my parents, it was like, well, you should take that and run with it. Yeah. And I don't know why I never looped that back into games at the time. And it was funny because I still like, I learned the first programming I did was in QBasic on I don't know, whatever it was, Windows 3.1, and you could make these super simple games, and I loved it, but I never put two and two together as a younger person that like I could make a career of that at the time. It was like, well, if you're going to do computer stuff, you know, you should, I don't know, design computers or make like electronics or something. And if you're going to do game stuff, well, what's that mean? Like drawing enemies or designing stuff? Well, you're good at math, so let's do the computer thing. Yeah. And I don't know. It's weird. Like, I'm not going to say I regret that, but I do often wonder if I'd made that connection earlier on, what it would have been like. Because I'm certain I would have gone for it. I'm totally certain I would have gone for it. And a lot of, like, bringing it back to the present for me, a lot of what is probably still keeping me out of the game industry is all of those adult things, right? Like, I mean, I do have a family now, the game industry. I mean, software in the game industry, programming jobs in the game industry do generally pay less than, like, you know, the big corporate Facebook, Microsoft type work. And the hours are famous for being higher and so on. Yeah. And it's not like, oh, I'm scared of that, I'm not going to get in. But I think having been on the other side for so long, like I do still have that ambition to cross over.
It's definitely hard to give yourself more stress for less money.
It is, especially like I found budgeting. It's not just like, oh, I'll reduce my paycheck by 10%, so we'll have 10% less money. It's almost like, the way I think of it, it's like, I know of course I could reduce my bills and so on and so forth, but like we're pretty frugal now, I think, for the most part, like compared to a lot of people.
As frugal as you were when you lived in Surrey?
Not quite, but part of that's like, well, I mean, we just had a child, and it's like, oh, let's spend money on our child. She needs the best, blah, blah, blah. I mean, part of that is, I mean, some of it's not fully within my control, of course, too, but I would say, like, the way I think of it, it's like, okay, you pay this much for your living expenses, you pay this much for food, and this much for whatever, and everything on the top is your kind of, I guess, disposable income, right? Yeah. So for me, the way I think is like, if I was to reduce my salary, just like tomorrow I took a job somewhere and it was a 20K cut or something, it's like that just comes right out of the disposable income. Yeah. And maybe that's okay. That's like, I feel like that's okay. It's just my disposable income. We have a quite aggressive savings plan right now. Yeah. So what would actually happen is disposable income would evaporate, and then the savings would get cut into, and that's where I'm starting to be like, that's harder for me. So I mean, that's kind of the present where I'm at, I guess. But it's weird. This isn't like, you hear people who are in the game industry talk about their jobs, and I will let you talk, but I'm sure you could say a lot of these things. But like, people always have such a passion, and you can just see, like, some people, you just know they're like maybe putting in maybe longer hours, or sometimes they are, and that's great. They love it. And what I've tried to do...
It doesn't necessarily succeed for them when they do that either.
I'm aware of that, totally. I'm looking at it with a focus on the negative, just to drive my point home, of course. But like, I guess my approach I've taken is to take that part of me that really wants to make games and wants to work on things and wants to be there, and for now anyway, make it a hobby.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm just working on projects on the side. I'm talking with people. I'm doing that stuff a lot, but it's weird to talk to people who are in the game industry because that's all they do and that's their job. So I mean, you know, if one of those people is stuck at work for a few hours, they're going to have to call their family and say, I'm stuck at work, I have to do this, and they do it, and the end result, maybe they get less time with their family, but they get the job done. Whereas when you make it a hobby project, if my kid is screaming, I can't really say, you know, sorry, I have to do this now.
Just keep screaming.
Yeah, you know, it is a hobby, and I mean, it's easier when you're a younger person and have less commitments to say, well, it's a hobby, I'm just going to shut down everything else for the night and focus on this for 10 hours.
Yeah.
When you're an adult with commitments, it's harder. So, I mean, it is a constant, I guess, fight I have where I'm trying to put this time in to this thing that's currently a hobby that I do consider a passion that I would love to move more into career-wise as well. But for me right now, it's that balance is certainly not at an ideal place. So I guess kind of to cap off my story, or the gist of it, future-wise, I'm still very open to it. I think if things were different, if money wasn't an issue, that would make it a lot easier. If, you know, if our daughter was a little older now, maybe, and I didn't need to be home to help so much, that might change things. I'm not trying to make... I know I keep going back to the hours. I think part of that is
that's a huge part of it, though, right?
Well, part of it, like, I've talked to my wife, and she's like, I'm sure she would say, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But you can just see in her eyes.
I mean...
you know, so...
I mean, that's the thing, and for me, it's largely the exact same way. Like, I used to work in film, and we worked stupid hours there, and I mentioned in one of the past podcasts about how we lived apart for a little while, and
we being you and your wife.
Yeah, not you and I.
We've lived apart a long time.
But it's you know, that's a large part of it, is particularly when you're young and ambitious, you're willing to just kind of put everything into something and not necessarily realize how much of a dent that's putting into the social life or the family life, or just, you know, in general life. And I feel that now, particularly that I've got a kid, it's really hard to sacrifice spare time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess
when you say sacrifice full time, you mean sacrifice free time, you mean sacrifice it to
a job.
Yeah,
like,
I see. Yeah.
Like no matter how much money you get compensated with for overtime, you know, in the case of being a full-time salary employee, you're probably not getting any extras. But no matter how much they compensated, even if it was double time or triple time and stuff, you have to stand back at one point and realize I'm trading away my life for this job, and every moment that I'm working is a moment that I'm not in my kid's life.
Yep.
And I'm not in my wife's life or spouse, if you're not necessarily me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And your kid will only be one once. They'll only be two once, right?
Yeah.
Which is an approach I've taken too. I sometimes think, I can make games when I'm 50 and I'm chilling out. And it doesn't work so easily, I know, but it's, you know, you start making these rationalizations when real life is there in front of you, and that's where you want to be, right?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to a lot of indie people, like when we were trying to do stuff here, we were getting advice from people. It's like, you just got to quit your job and put everything into it. And
Everyone's like 21-year-olds,
Yeah.
like living in one-bedroom apartments with 10 other people.
Yeah.
And you're like, this advice is highly contextual.
Yeah, it is, and
Yeah.
it makes sense to an extent. Like especially if you're a 21-year-old student, and I don't know, you've got loans coming from your family or something to help support you, and you've got 10 roommates. But then there is definitely the side to it that at some point you don't necessarily want to share space with other people, and you want to spend time with family, and it's not always practical to do that. Like you need to balance the safety of having a full-time job and being able to guarantee that you're putting money into savings for retirement, or you're gambling it on a hit or miss ultra success.
Yeah, that's it. That's totally it. I found it like when we were talking to a lot of people and kind of networking and meeting people and going to the meetups and stuff, it was very telling to me that, and part of me says, well, of course this is how it is, but like everyone was either, they fit into exactly those groups, right? They were either really young, they kind of had nothing to lose, or they had like the supportive working spouse and they were kind of free to do their thing.
Yeah.
Or they had been doing this before they, I guess, moved into the life phase we're in with kids and so forth. And, now they were at the stage where they're having children and married and so forth, but they'd already kind of hit it big early on.
Yeah.
And I just didn't see a lot of people who were like, yeah, I have a family, but I'm all in, whatever. And it's just like anything. It's just like if you went to like a startup camp, I'm sure it's the same thing, right? It's not like you have like, it's not going to be filled with 30-year-old parents who are like, yeah, I hope this works or we're screwed, right?
Yeah.
But it still, I mean, kind of set the perspective for me.
Yeah. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of these people who look at me as...
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. That's why your story, I think, is interesting, because you entered the game industry when you were, what, 30, 31? I mean,
yeah,
comparatively, probably very late, I would guess.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm almost wondering now if I should just take it back to when I was a kid to tell my
Go for it,
story
man. Take it away.
So, yeah, for me, it sounded like we kind of started off with the same ideas in mind and then took them in slightly different directions. Like, I was the same way where I was playing, like, Super Mario 3 and stuff, and I would be drawing out levels. And not levels that were in the game, but my own levels.
Yeah.
And part of that was I was trying to convince people that I was so far into the game already that these were the levels that I'd gotten to. and
That's awesome, actually.
there was like this thing when I was growing up where like a lot of us just lied to each other about how amazing we were. And I remember there was this one guy who would lie about how his uncle worked at Nintendo, and he would tell me about all these secret things that were in Mortal Kombat and stuff, and
That's awesome.
like he's like, yeah, there's this character named Ermac, and you can totally get him in Mortal Kombat 2. And it's like,
My uncle showed me, right?
Yeah, when you're young and your only source of information is
Stupid.
GamePro magazine or GamePro TV, or your friend whose uncle works at the company. So yeah, we would totally just be lying to each other to do one-upsmanship, and so yeah, I would draw levels, and that eventually turned into stuff like where I found out about Super Mario 64, and so I was like, okay, well, I should start designing Super Mario 64 2. And so I did drawings of like all the characters and stuff that should be in that, and I would draw like the Magic Koopa from Super Mario World, but I would draw him as though he were made out of polygons.
Okay, awesome. Were you ever tempted to like send these to Nintendo? Because my
that was
so
totally
awesome.
my plan. Was I was gonna
Everyone had that, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna design the whole game, and then I'd send it, and then they would hire me to be in charge of it.
Kids are
as
awesome.
you do with the 12-year-old.
Yes. With brilliant game design ideas.
Yeah. So yeah, that was basically my start, and then I think I mentioned last time or a couple sessions ago about how I would draw like all the Mega Man bosses and stuff for game, what was it, Nintendo Power or whatever. I would try to invent all the evil robot masters.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, early on, like I got very much into drawing, and trying to do concept art, I guess, and it never occurred to me to try to do anything as far as mechanics goes. Like I never designed card games, like you were saying, or paper games or anything. Like it was all about the artwork for me.
Interesting. That's very interesting. As a slight digression, when we were working on I think that kind of, you could see that when we were working on the game, because I was all about mechanics and making this thing like almost like the rules of the game, and you were very focused on the art side and so on. Yeah.
Which, if you're going to have a partnership, I think that's kind of the way to do it, is to get two people that can collaborate but also focus on different things.
Absolutely.
So I think there was some success in that, even though both of us were working full time and very interested in maintaining our income and stuff.
A little on the risk-averse side, yes.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
So
agree.
I mean, that is kind of how it led. Like growing up in rural Nova Scotia, it never occurred to me that I could actually work in video games. It's like everything that I enjoyed came from Japan.
Yeah, I remember that. That was, so nowadays it's a very different atmosphere, but back then it was like, oh, I want to make games, I have to go to Japan. That's it, right? At least that was my point of view, because literally, as you say, like everything I cared about came from Japan in terms of games. Like I know the computer game market was a lot more American, but when I was a kid, I was like, oh, those games suck, right? I want to play Mario, I want to make Final Fantasy, I want to make Mega Man, right?
Yeah. And even back then, like all the stuff that I was playing, like Capcom and Konami and Squaresoft and stuff, that was all like sprite art, pixel art stuff, and that was kind of what I identified with. Whereas the American stuff, like from Sierra at least, was like vector art.
Yeah.
And I didn't enjoy that nearly as much. Like I didn't want to be doing stuff on a computer. I wanted to be doing stuff on a video game console.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what it was like for me as a kid, and unlike you, it didn't even occur to me that hey, I could learn the language and go there. It was just literally, well, that's Japanese. They don't speak English. I guess that's that. I'm not making video games.
Part of what motivated me, like the two motivated each other, I guess, but like deciding to make electronics or deciding to study electronics at school was like I could maybe build, I don't know, I wanted to build like cell phones or like that kind of thing. I don't know, just consumer electronics. And at the time, I mean, in what was it, 2002 or whatever, like, there's no iPhone, there's no anything, like all the coolest phones are from Japan. So I was like, well, I guess I'll have to go to Japan, so I should really work on this language. But then it kind of, like learning Japanese, it was like, well, now if I'm going to do that, what can I do? And there's these other cool electronic companies, maybe I'll work at Sony someday. Ooh, like they kind of motivated each other.
So it was interesting because like I from an early kid, I think my parents had like some sort of a little thing that we had to fill out every year that would be like, what's your favorite color and how tall are you and what do you want to do when you're an adult, and
what, like a record of you growing up kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we would put like our report cards in. It was like a big book. And so like when I was super early on, my ambitions were like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a deep sea diver, I want to be a video game designer. And then eventually I just kind of gave up on video games, and when I was in high school, I was like, okay, well, I can't make video games, but there are some animation companies here in Nova Scotia, and animation's totally a thing in North America, so let's do that instead. And
interesting.
so I started getting into animation, and in high school, like, nobody really knew anything about computer animation and stuff, so they're all like, well, if you want to do animation, you need to take calculus and you need to take C++, and so I took those classes in high school, and then went to art school and never used any of that ever again.
Oh man.
But that actually ended up working out to a degree because I eventually figured out I didn't want to do character art. I wanted to do visual effects, and that is a
very
field.
technical art, right?
It is a very technical art, and it's. I find it to be really fun because it's a combination of abstract art and technical stuff as well. So I have over the years developed my math skills a little bit more than I did. And I don't know. I really enjoyed that, but yeah, at some point you and I got back into contact with each other, and we were just like, "Hey, why aren't we making video games? Let's do that." And
I was gonna say, actually, that's, I think, even just interest-wise, that's kind of where we converge again. I think is where, like, for me, if I can think of my ideal job or like the thing I want to do or the things that interest me in general, it's like these very technical arts, kind of.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, kind of what you do, or if you pull it back to more of a technical role, even like, I think a technical job that supports artists maybe might be cool. Like if you were on the Photoshop team and you're building kind of the image algorithms or something,
Yeah.
like that's quite technical, but there's that interface with creative people and creative things.
Yeah.
Or like maybe looking back at the creative side, like say architecture. If you were an architect, there's kind of like you're being creative, but there's that technical element you just need to understand. Those are the things that I find just fascinating. So,
Yeah.
I mean, games are kind of in that spot, right? Like even
Yeah.
if you're the programmer, like especially if it is your own project, you're designing everything, and there's like it's a creative effort that just has that technical foundation, I guess, and that's a fascinating thing to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate that side of it. Like that for me is at least half of the fun is developing a system for doing things. Like if I want to do splashes, coming up with one pretty splash isn't that fun. It's coming up with a system that can,
like an algorithm for making splashes.
Yeah, for making splashes, and you can drop any object in the water and it'll create an appropriate splash that looks nice. And that's
awesome.
the fun part for me. And then I have no problem whatsoever handing that tool off to someone else so that they can make the splashes.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's kind of why I got into effects instead of the character art. Is like, and maybe if you're doing the concept art, it's the same thing where you design the character, and then the other people are the ones that get to animate it, and like you did the fun creative part, but you don't have to do all the laborious grunt work of just drawing the arm moving slightly different spot every frame.
Yep. Well, it's kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of analogs there in software. Like I think the design part is fun, and then you have a bunch of grunt work just implementing what you already have envisioned. But then if you do that well, you want to reduce the amount of like oh, it's too early, mind is not working, what am I looking for? You want to have as much reuse of your own work as you can, and you want to, I mean, an approach I like to take is to have kind of maybe not necessarily procedurally generated stuff, but like you say, like an algorithm for making parts of the game out, so you're not just kind of grunt working the whole thing. Work
smart, not hard.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Something like that, whatever. But the approach is, there's certainly analogs, I would say. Cool.
But yeah, so it was interesting because I was working on film, and then we decided to work on the indie game, and that was satisfying, if not financially viable, because we weren't really striving to make it financially viable at the time. So yeah, coming back full circle, I guess, to current day, like I used the indie stuff as a stepping stone to get into AAA production. And I feel like for a lot of indie game people, there's this philosophy of like, you just
goes the other way.
Yeah, like you just gotta, and maybe it'll go the other way for me too, but I feel like a lot of these people that we were saying that are like 21 and fresh out of school or whatever, they just want to do their stuff, and they don't necessarily care if it's successful or not right away. And part of the whole philosophy with that is that you've just got to fail fast. And the more stuff you generate, the more you learn, and eventually you'll be able to do something good.
Yep.
And for me, like that's definitely important. Like you have to learn from your mistakes and stuff before you can actually polish something that's good. But I felt like it made more sense for me to be doing that in an environment with other people making the games, and I can kickstart that learning by actually working on a AAA thing and having other people like tell me the tips and tricks, as opposed to just floundering on my own.
Absolutely. I have had very much the same experience. I mean, I'm impressed. Like, you always hear these stories of even, like, say, Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. It's like right out of school they start their companies and now they're billionaires, and it's like that's super impressive. But it depends on the type of person you are, maybe. But I feel like it's a very legitimate thing to like have this idea to eventually be there and maybe spend a couple years in industry and seeing what it's like and getting experience and learning to work with people. And part of it too, I think, for me anyway, like obviously when you join a company, you're starting from the bottom. And so you get that perspective of what it's like to be there. Like if I just started my own company, now I'm hiring people, like I might, without that perspective, I might unintentionally mistreat people or like kind of start treating people as these grunt monkeys when instead of like, since I have a role at my current company where, there is a chain of command and I have my boss who gives me tasks, and the way we work together, I can tell he really cares about my development stuff. And realizing how important that is to me, like if I was to start my own company, I would of course take that and put that experience back into how I would manage that company, where I might not have that piece if I just did that right out of school. And I mean, that's kind of a soft skill thing, but even the technical side, or perhaps especially the technical side, there's just so much learnings you can do. So I can relate to that point very strongly, actually.
So I always wonder whether if I were to go to the full indie meetup or whatever, if people are going to be like, oh, you're such a sellout. You gave up on your indie love and now you're working for the man. But it's like, I don't know. To me, it makes a lot of sense to be where I am. And I'm getting a steady paycheck and I'm doing what I love, even if it's not my personal baby. But then, there is also that balance that I'm trying to strike of making sure that I'm sensible with overtime and stuff so that I can spend time with my family. So that definitely puts a damper on any sort of personal side projects.
We're both in the same spot there. One question I have, and you kind of touched on it a bit, but I know when we were working on the indie game, we kind of were those people you're now talking about, where it's like, we have to do this and not sell our souls, right? But I mean, probably we're older and wiser, et cetera, blah blah blah. But I'm just curious, how you, I guess, like, I remember you with that attitude, and now obviously you are working at a big game company, like how you've transitioned into your current attitude, or I guess like those things that were so important to you then, like I need to own the product and I want to be making design decisions, how you've I guess been able to transition into your current role.
It was a tough transition
with
for
those
me.
Attitudes.
It was a tough transition for me because I guess I am a little bit more rebellious and indie spirited, and I think I had an attitude problem at first, where I felt like
better than other people.
You're hiring me as a contracted employee. I'm here to do whatever you've told me to do and nothing more than that. I'm not going to help you innovate because these are my intellectual properties and I can't share these. That's who I am and stuff. Like to put it as snotty of a spin on it as I can. So I feel like I did have a little bit of that going on at first, and it took me a little while of going to meetings and realizing that like everyone is kind of in the same boat where we just want to have something that we're proud of. And I guess what I had in mind of how a AAA company works was different than the reality of how it works. Like,
it's not actually a heartless machine.
It's not nearly as much of a heartless machine as I thought.
There's a little bit there still.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Like, I've never worked at a big game company, but I mean, people are passionate, especially those people that do have, you know, a lot of say and a lot of design leeway, I imagine. So,
Well, I mean, and I still do want to work on a personal project at some point because I do tend to have story ideas and stuff, and I want to push those. And you only get a limited say in how that works when you're an artist or a
yeah.
programmer or whatever, as opposed
Yeah.
to the design lead.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
so
that's another question, if I may interject. What does a personal project mean to you? Like, does that mean you're building the game, or like you and two other people, or like what if you were the head of a team
I
and the
would
team
be
was fairly big?
I would be happy to be in charge of a team because I recognize that I don't want to do every single aspect.
Hmm.
Um, I do have an interest in every single aspect, but you know, if
Yeah.
I've rigged one character, I don't necessarily want to rig 100 characters.
You rigged one, you rigged them all.
Uh, so I would definitely be happy working with other people, but I want to be able to push my creative thoughts more than I necessarily get to at this moment.
Right.
But at least on the last project that I was on, it was great because like when you're working on a section of the game, you have a meeting, and it's not just all of the effects people in the meeting. It's like one effects person, one audio person, one environment person, like one character animator. It's like one person from every team,
Hmm.
and we as a team get to collaborate on what needs to be done for the level. So you get a larger say than I imagined before I got into the game industry.
Right.
Because I literally imagined it as like the director made all the decisions and then everyone else just carries out those decisions, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wonder how
Um,
much that varies company to company too.
I imagine it does.
Yeah.
And probably yeah, it's definitely going to vary project to project as well as company
Yeah.
to company. Because you know, when you if you're going to work on NHL, whatever year it is, I'm sure there's a lot less creative decisions that get to be made than if you're working on like Skyrim, for example.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely. And I mean,
So-
isn't that the case in, say, film too? Like, I don't know. It depends on the nature of the project, or like if it's a safe project, or
yeah,
maybe just as a VFX person, you don't get that freedom to make choices.
Well,
I have no idea, but
yeah. In film, I think there's a lot less creativity allowed by the average employee because typically what's happened is someone has storyboarded the film, or at least the sequences have all been planned out, and you know exactly the shot numbers and what's going to happen from sequence to sequence so that everything hooks up. So there tends to be a lot less creativity allowed on the individual artists there, in my opinion.
right.
But again, that can vary from project to project because like a lot of visual effects is like adding stuff in the background that's not a green screen. and so a lot of the stuff is supposed to be invisible, and if you can't tell that it's there, then you've done your job right.
Right.
But then there's obviously going to be other stuff, like if you were to look at I don't know, like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, like there's a lot of magically type stuff that happens in the middle of this shot that, you know, isn't real world based.
Hmm.
So obviously when you get to do stuff that's more abstract like that, you're going to get more creative control over what's done. Like you might do different iterations on an effect that they look completely different.
Cool. Is that so? I mean, does like the individual get that, or is it kind of like, I mean, as a team, do you decide what to do?
It'll vary. You'll generally have a direction that you can take it, but if you have an idea, you can brainstorm that or like prototype it or whatever, and you show them side by side, and if they prefer what you went with, then you go with what you went with.
Cool.
But yeah, that starts to get into difficult territory because a lot of the time, like, there's just not time to do your own thing like that. So But yeah, whereas with games, I think there's a lot more discussion up front and collaborative discussion on inventing ideas on the spot. And that might also just be a difference between working at a service studio versus working on your own intellectual property.
Yeah.
Because that's the experience that I had. It was like working on Gears, like that is owned by Microsoft, and we, like that was our product.
Yeah.
Whereas working on Jack the Giant Slayer, like that was, I think Legendary Pictures or someone who was in charge of that, and then we were one of many studios working on it.
Right. Do you see an analog there too in games? I mean, if you're like some development studio and you have this big publisher breathing down your throat, there's probably going to be a lot, I would imagine, a lot less chance to be creative than kind of an in-house owned project.
Probably.
Yeah. Maybe you don't have, well, I certainly don't, but you haven't been there yet, I guess.
Yeah.
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 Cool.
I mean,
Well,
I haven't worked at an outsourcing place, but there are outsourcing places in games too, and they are sent more clear instructions of what's expected. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it sounds like you've had a positive experience anyway.
Yeah, I'm loving it so far.
Awesome.
And yeah, I thought it was going to be a worse experience than it was, and so I am glad that I've gotten into the games industry, even though it's not in Japan, which is interesting because now I feel like the working conditions in Japan are such a state that I'm very hesitant to ever try working there.
Yeah, you should read the Untold History of Japanese Game Developers.
Yeah,
it might finalize that decision, honestly.
Yeah.
Even when I had ambitions to work in Japan, I knew it kind of was what it was, and I guess I formulated my my attitude towards that somewhat, almost like I conditioned myself for it.
Yeah,
Probably
which again is easier when you're fresh out of school, right?
Exactly, it is, and I don't know, it was a reality I was ready to face. But now that I'm employed at an American company, it's, I don't know, the freedom is very nice. It's not just the time, it's the freedom, I think. Like,
Yeah.
Microsoft doesn't really, I mean, you were employed there, I think, as a contractor, remind me. Yeah, I mean, they're quite flexible with just your work-life arrangement and kind of what you do on your own time. Like, I think it's not standard in Japan or I think a lot of Asia to do that. Like, if you work for this company, that's it. You're not doing your own thing. You live by the company rules, you die by the company rules, and you stay there.
Yeah.
And, there's not going to be this opportunity to kind of work on your own projects or to like.
Yeah, it's
bend
pretty
your time
standard.
around.
It's pretty standard in filming games that you're not supposed to have side projects. So that was
Which is-
actually something at Microsoft that was a big plus. Is that there wasn't very much care. Like, as long as you're not going to do something that's directly detrimental to the company.
Indeed. Well, looking forward, what are your plans as far as staying in the game industry or, I don't know, into doing your own project? Or?
I don't know. I've had, up to this point, short-term contract after short-term contract, and so I've always been spending time thinking what's coming next.
Right.
And working towards that. And
you're currently full-time?
Yeah, so
So you could stay forever if you wanted to.
Yeah, I started looking for short-term work, and for the first time was unable to find short-term work and only found long-term work. So I'm now a full-time employee, and yeah, there's no set end date. So for now,
how's it feel?
Weird.
Mixed opinions.
Yeah, it's weird because I've been, for the past decade of my career, have been used to it not being full time, and so all of a sudden getting this thought of, okay, I guess it's time to just settle in and try to figure out what can I do to make my job easier long term at this one studio as opposed to just get stuff done. I guess that comes back to like tool building and whatnot, but yeah, it's different. So, and I mean, where I'm at right now, I'm not supposed to have any competing projects. So, Any side project type stuff that I have right now is purely educational in purpose. Right. So
does your employer own it, or you're simply not allowed to sell it?
I would have to go back into my contracts and stuff to see what it is and see what I can share. but
I got it. But you're not gonna play with that, I assume.
Yeah. But yeah, it's as far as I know right now, anything that's educational on purpose that I'm not sharing, like for free on an app store or anything, that's completely fine, because it's it's my spare time, and realistically they would never find out about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything that I'm doing right now is kind of educational in purpose, like reading these game design books, or I'd attempted to read The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Like, I'm trying to do stuff right now that can grow my abilities to do stuff, and then I don't know, maybe down the road I'll be able to start developing my own IP or something.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to us.
Or maybe I'll find that maybe this full-time gig is all that it's cut up to be, and I'll just stick with it.
Golden shackles? Hopefully not. Hopefully it's a true love.
We'll see. Like I said, it's still a bit of an adjustment mentally right now. So I don't know. I'm enjoying it, and I'm sure I'll continue to enjoy it for a few years.
Very awesome. Very awesome. Okay. Well, I myself, I don't have like a solid full-time plan, but I'm very open, of course, to like jumping into a game industry job. My main concern with myself is it's easy to get pigeonholed in tech. I mean, you really, really don't want to do that. I think that looks bad. But I mean, it does happen, and I just feel like if I sent a resume to a game company right now, they'd be like, why is he applying? I mean, look at this. It's like all like firmware jobs and supporting hardware and like very different things. So I don't know if, like, I think your skills transferred quite directly where you were doing visual effects for movies. Well, that works in games too. Come use those tools and apply your knowledge and do it here, right?
There are a lot of differences, but yeah, I understand.
I'm sure there are, but people, I just feel like, I guess just focusing on my own perspective, I'm not sure it would be an easy thing to do, which goes back to why also I'm trying to work on this as a hobby. Maybe that will be successful, who knows, but worst case scenario, it's a great experience, and I can at the very least go in and say, here's my experience, here's what I know, and here's why I think I can do this job, and I have that piece versus just my pure professional experience, which has gone in a very different direction. So.
All right, cool. Well, looking at the time right now, we should probably get going.
Yeah, get to work.
Yeah, that was a good conversation, though.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, until next time, man.
All right, talk to you later.
Yep, cheers.
Cheers.